In a league like the NBA that has a lot of unique situations, one thing will stand out forever. We will never, ever have another draft like the 2020 NBA draft. The circumstances around it, the way that the draft has worked out, makes it the most unique individual NBA draft to look back on throughout the history of the league. In those situations, the unique circumstances have led to a class that is just, it's honestly crazy to look at. Now, obviously, at the time, the league was basically shut down. Guys weren't really traveling. A lot of the interviews and stuff were over Zoom. The workout situation was weird. The college season was cut short. There was no NCAA tournament. It was a very, very weird evaluation process, in addition to some prospects that were just very hard to figure out as well, which leads to a top three and really an entire first round that is unprecedented in its weirdness. And we start at number one overall with Anthony Edwards, who absolutely goes number one in a redraft as the best player in the class and one of the better young players in the entire NBA moving forward. And I will be honest, I was not an Anthony Edwards guy at the time of this draft. I thought LaMelo Ball should have gone first for some reasons that we're going to get to when we get to LaMelo at 3. And I just, I thought Anthony Edwards was good, but in a class that didn't seem overwhelmingly talented, him having this kind of a ceiling of like one of the best guards in the entire league was just not something I foresaw. He was a bit of a shot chucker in college, and it was clear that the athleticism and the talent was there, but there were question marks at the time about whether he really even liked playing basketball that much. There were question marks in terms of his overall skill level on the offensive end, and even though his college situation wasn't fantastic, you would have liked to see him be more efficient, right? Now, granted, like I said, evaluation process was weird. It's not something where if this had gone poorly for Minnesota, I don't think anybody would have been really mad about them getting the choice wrong. I mean, there's a lot of picks that went wrong in this class. I don't think anybody necessarily blames anybody for that. But Anthony Edwards turns out to absolutely be the right selection. His growth as an individual player is one of the most impressive things we've seen over the last 10 years in the NBA. He's improved tremendously as a playmaker. He's a fantastic shooter. The athleticism is translated. He competes defensively, has great size. They've empowered him to be even more of an on-ball creator now than he ever was before. Anthony Edwards has turned into an unbelievable story, and in a draft class that was as weird as this one was, to absolutely nail the first pick in the draft is really impressive for Minnesota. Unfortunately, I can't say the same thing about the Golden State Warriors at number 2 overall. They select James Wiseman here, and at the time, here was the thought process for Golden State. They didn't need another guard. They felt like they had perimeter talent, and what they had been lacking, at least in their minds for years, was a true option at the 5 spot. They'd played Draymond at the 5. Kevon Looney was fine. Going back years before that, it was Andrew Bogut, right? But they never really had a true difference maker at the 5 spot except for when they would put Draymond there. And they saw James Wiseman as this really high upside front court guy that they felt like they could have do a lot of their passing stuff, be a great rim roller, provide athleticism, defend the rim. And it was really a high upside pick for them because, again, remember, like this was the disaster season for Golden State. Like everybody got hurt. They were one of the worst teams in the entire league, and they got a very high draft pick despite having a really good core around them, a team that would go on to win the title not much long after this draft happened. They would go on to win the title despite the fact they picked 2nd overall in this class, and they had a unique opportunity to add a big time young player to a core that was already really, really good when healthy. And they picked Wiseman, and Wiseman played a handful of college games. There were some eligibility issues, and it was basically like picking a high school player at that point. And it just immediately didn't work out. Granted, his kind of early development in Golden State was so tough for him because he was immediately put in a situation where he had to make winning plays, and they couldn't play him as much as other teams would have because of, they needed to win. Like they couldn't afford big mistakes. And like if it's Kevon Looney who's going to make the right play 90% of the time but not be a high impact player, or James Wiseman who might make some flashy plays but is going to screw up every defensive rotation, like he's just not going to play a ton. He didn't play a ton his first couple years in the league, didn't improve a ton, and basically made no impact whatsoever on Golden State or any other team to this point. And there's still certainly talent there, but he just never developed, and you can blame that on the situation. You can blame that on a lot of stuff, but unfortunate selection there for Golden State. 3 overall. It's so funny that LaMelo Ball ends up in this class because I talked about, how unique this draft ended up being in terms of the circumstances, and LaMelo's path to getting here was certainly unique, right? I mean, he played professionally, completely skipped college. He played in multiple leagues professionally. His story as a high school player is really interesting as well. And by the time the draft rolled around, I was saying that LaMelo Ball should be the first pick in the draft because I felt like compared to the 2 other guys that were competing for that selection in Wiseman and Anthony Edwards, he had the only elite skill in the entire class, and that was his passing and his vision. And yes, there was some warts to his game and wasn't very efficient. Was the jump shot going to translate, all this stuff? But I felt like he had great size and great passing instincts, and that was the only elite skill of the entire draft, and that's why I thought he should go first overall. Ultimately, the only thing I feel like that has held LaMelo back is just injuries. The last few seasons, he has not been healthy. He's played like 50-something. He's played basically the same amount of games that Ben Simmons has played in the last 2 years. Like, that's how bad things have been for LaMelo in terms of a health perspective. And there's a lot of talent there, right? I mean, he's an all-star caliber player his first couple of seasons in the league once he really got going, and he can shoot, he can pass, he's a creator. He now has a great backcourt partner alongside Brandon Miller, and I think this is going to end up being a really good pick for Charlotte if LaMelo can just get healthy. There's still a lot to like, I think, for LaMelo Ball's game. 4th overall is Patrick Williams, and this was the spot that everything kind of dropped off for this class. Everybody knew that it was a top 3 centered class, and at 4, Chicago, again, just kind of took a high upside swing here. Patrick Williams, great athlete, great defender, needed to improve offensively, and just hasn't done that, unfortunately. Had some early injury issue stuff, and despite some flashes and some interesting plays, just has never developed the part of his offensive game that Chicago's really needed him to. And again, this just happens sometimes, it seems. You just pick at the wrong time in the draft. Like, if you get a little bit of better lottery luck and you pick at 3, you end up with LaMelo. You end up at 4, you get Patrick Williams. And yes, there's some really good players later on in this class at 12 and 21 and other spots, but those guys probably weren't going to get picked at 4th overall, and so Chicago just kind of tried to do the best with what they had. 5th overall is Isaac Okoro, goes to Cleveland. He's been fine, but a top 5 pick, becoming just like a role player wing that can not really shoot that well. It's a good transition player and can guard, but not a very good shooter. I understand what Cleveland was trying to do, complimentary wing, improve as a shooter. Just hasn't happened for Isaac Okoro at number 5. Number 6, Onyeka Okongwu. I love this guy. I think he's going to be really, really good over the next handful of seasons as he continues to grow and develop. He's been behind Clint Capella like the entire time in Atlanta, has continued to learn a lot of things, I'm sure, from him, but he is ready, in my opinion, to start for Atlanta. And I don't know that he's ever going to be like an all-star caliber guy or anything, but like what Clint Capella has been for a decade, I think that's what Onyeka Okongwu can be. And this ends up being a really solid pick here for Atlanta at 6th overall. 7th overall, Killian Hayes. There were some people out there that thought Killian Hayes was one of the most talented players in the class, potentially should have gone 1st overall. Obviously, that didn't happen for him. He's been cut by Detroit. Just not an NBA caliber player, unfortunately. Can pass a little bit, can't shoot at all, can kind of guard a little bit, doesn't bring great size. Nothing spectacular really is being brought to the table by Killian Hayes. Tough pick there for Detroit, although this top 10 outside of the top 3 is not fantastic. Number 8, Obi Toppin, who's been pretty solid not only in New York, but now with the Pacers as well. Great athlete, really good college player, and has improved as a 3-point shooter, and I think is going to continue to be someone that is going to be at least helpful to teams throughout his career, although probably never going to be an all-star. Number 9, Deni Advida. I always mispronounce his last name. I apologize. Deni. I think Deni's good, and I've said this for like a couple of years. Deni can guard. He's really square and strong with the way that he plays. If he can shoot the ball well and attack closeouts a little better, whether it's in Washington or elsewhere, Deni is going to be a good player on a good team somewhere and be really, really helpful. I think this is a pick that could look way, way better a couple of seasons from now, even if he doesn't end up staying in Washington. 10, Jalen Smith, also now on the Pacers along with Obi Toppin, but this was a weird one. Phoenix made this pick. Jalen Smith was this front court player that could space the floor a little bit, had some athleticism, good size, and after 2 years, Phoenix just gave up on him. Like, teams don't almost ever turn down the option on a player after 2 years on a rookie contract, certainly not a top 10 pick, and Phoenix just said he's not good enough. So they basically cut him after 2 seasons. He's been fine in Indiana, but to not even try and use that player as an asset or anything is it's a tough look for a top 10 pick. Number 11, Devin Vassell in San Antonio has continued to improve as a shooter and a really nice offensive weapon for San Antonio. He's going to continue, in my opinion, to just be kind of a complementary offensive player, a nice number 2 option alongside another good guard that can create. But Devin Vassell's a good player, and again, in a weird class, getting this kind of value at 11 is pretty good. 12, though, this is where things change for everyone. 12 is Tyrese Haliburton, who hasn't been fantastic to end the year in Indiana. I think he's still kind of beat up and hurt, but in Sacramento was really good, and since getting to Indiana has shown himself to be one of the better guards in the Eastern Conference. And there were concerns at the time of the draft about his weird shooting form, and people really liked a lot of the stuff that he brought to the table in terms of his passing and his length and everything, but the shooting form just threw people off. And I think in a different draft evaluation process where teams really got to get a better look at Tyrese Haliburton, maybe had an opportunity to make a little bit of a run in the NCAA tournament, he probably goes top 5. He might even go 4th to Chicago, but given the way the evaluation situation was with this draft, Him going 12 is not that surprising, although in hindsight, obviously, is kind of crazy to look back at. 14, another Indiana Pacer. They have 4 different players in the top 14 of this class. Aaron Nesmith, good player, nice complimentary wing role player for Indiana. 15 is Cole Anthony, good score for Orlando. Smaller guard, but someone that can really score the ball. 16, Isaiah Stewart. I love Isaiah Stewart. I think he's going to be really, really good. Again, ironically, another team that ends up with a lot of picks in this draft. Detroit has Isaiah Stewart. They ended up with James Wiseman, and then they had Killian Hayes as well there for a little bit. Isaiah Stewart can shoot a little bit. He's really strong and big, can guard, great athlete at the rim. I really like Isaiah Stewart. I kind of hope he ends up on a team like OKC or something here moving forward in the future. Josh Green, 18, another nice high upside player that is going to continue to grow and improve, can really guard. As long as he can figure out how to shoot, he's going to be a nice player for years to come. 21, Tyrese Maxey. The fact that in this weird of a draft, Haliburton goes 12, Maxey goes 21. Again, different evaluation perspective. Maybe Tyrese Maxey goes way higher in this draft, but incredible value for Philadelphia, game-changing value for them, especially after they traded for Harden and then he ended up leaving. One of the better scoring guards in the Eastern Conference, an incredible compliment alongside Joel Embiid, and great value at 21. 25, Emmanuel Quickley, one of the better bench guards in the league throughout his time in the league so far. Of course, now ends up in Toronto. Has improved as a shooter. Again, just this class has so many guards like this that end up being really, really good that in hindsight probably should have gone earlier. And then 28, Jaden McDaniels has turned into a really good two-way wing for Minnesota. Kind of a down year for him this year, a little bit of an up and down player, but a really, really good piece moving forward for Minnesota. And that is that's the very, very weird 2020 NBA draft.